Good afternoon. Thanks to our organizers and the host for inviting me to participate in this panel. I'm going to be very brief. I'll take up my 5 minutes, but hopefully we can have a discussion afterwards on this. I'm tempted to start with, and I'm going to start with a definition, which I extracted from ISRA's latest masterpiece, the textbook on Islamic finance. It's called Islamic Financial System, Principles and Operations. And according to this, the form of a contract refers to an expression made by the contracting parties to declare their inner will to undertake a contract and thereafter be bound by certain obligations. Now, I don't know how the lawyers are going to quantify or put into contract this concept of to declare their inner will, but it would be very interesting to know that. The point I'm trying to make is that communication is all about terminology and the use of language. I mean, the most effective form of communication is simplicity, clarity, efficacy of the message, the information contained in, the accuracy of that information, the objectivity of that information, the professionalism, and also how it's presented and delivered. And of course, if you want to go that extra mile, some would argue that communicating should also have those extra tiers of ethics in terms of they should meet the maqasid sharia and also the principles of maslahah. Now, I'm not going to repeat some of the other sort of definitions, but I think we have to be careful that we're not reinventing the wheel and also getting preoccupied with this question of form versus substance. I think from a Sharia point of view, it is explicit that both explicit and implicit, that both form and substance of a contract have to adhere to Sharia principles and in essence, maqasid Sharia, and some would even go further and say that the principles and concept of the public good, maslahah, especially in today's in the context of today's turbulence in the global market and economies. And I don't think there can be any compromise on this. Yes, we can discuss in detail, bisect, dissect, what's the structures, the various implications from various angles, the Sharia angle, the legal angle, accounting angle, whatever. But as some of the speakers this morning, and I think there was Sheikh Madassa who said there is a harmony and a synergy between both form and substance in that respect. This issue is not new. I mean, I remember covering in the 1980s. I'm not that old, by the way. We had the same debate over the murabaha. And, you had the genuine muraba, the international muraba, and the fictitious muraba. And those days, the Sharia scholars were not savvy enough to go around inspecting bonded warehouses or and that respect. But in that, of course, in more recent manifestations, I mean, the next tier of debate was over the Malaysian practice of Bay'at Dayn and of course Bay'al-Ina, and more recently Tawarruk and of course the Alfi statements on sukuk, mudaraba and musharaka sukuk, relating to purchase undertaking and the guaranteeing of principle. Communication in the Islamic finance industry has always been a major problem. And the communication between regulators, I mean with regulators and between regulators. I won't tell you what some regulators privately tell me, but there is a serious problem that they are not communicating with each other on the level that is required to take the contemporary Islamic finance industry forward. Communication with market players and between market players. They say beware of a lady's scorn and whatnot. I think it's beware of a market player's scorn as well, because they can be equally brutal in spreading disinformation about competitors and rivals. Communication with the wider stakeholders. We are ruining the fact of and talking about the lack of financial literacy, not only in the conventional sector, but also in the Islamic financial sector. Financial literacy is a major problem. That's why we have some of these very obvious issues coming out, people talking about, but is that real? Is Islamic finance real? Or is it not just another casuistry or, a different way of hiding interest? And of course, communication with Sharia advisories and between Sharia advisories. This is a major problem, and I think Sharia scholars often say that we're not in the business of criticizing each other's fatwas and that. But I think this misses the point, because there should be much more open discussion and consultation. I know in the past periods, the debate, the ijtihad, used to border on the brutal sometimes. There was really, really very, very deep discussion and disagreements in that respect. Why is this underdeveloped culture there? It's partly due to the underdeveloped culture of disclosure and transparency. You try to get quality information from all these various market players in Islamic finance. It's almost impossible. They hide behind confidentiality agreements and God knows what. There's also an underdeveloped independent financial journalism and analysis industry, because there's not enough scrutiny, independent scrutiny of what you guys are doing. And I've tried so many times, IDB, other multilaterals, to try to train the next generation of financial journalists who are, competent in Islamic finance. There's no interest. They look at you as if you are from Mars or something. And of course, one of the strengths of the conventional sector is, this very robust culture of financial journalism. Also, in terms of corporate communications, the culture is very underdeveloped. Institutions largely are only interested in promotional and marketing rather than articulating the real issues and underlying structures in this debate. There's a formulaic approach. I can take press releases from Helen Knowlton or McCann Erickson. You just substitute the quote and the name, and it's the same. There's no attempt even to discuss some of the issues. Underdeveloped information and data collection and presentation, and as I said earlier, underdeveloped financial literacy in Islamic finance and consumer stakeholder education. I think we need an education equivalent of microfinance in Islamic finance. Just very briefly, Sharia governance framework is a very, very important element. I'm not going to go over that. Question you can ask is a fatwa an intellectual property? I've been told by Sharia scholars that it is when I request a fatwa relating to a particular transaction. So this raises some issues. I mean, of course, we recently had the issue in Dubai Financial Services Authority where Peter Casey was reportedly criticizing complex financial structures, especially, I think, relating to the Nakhil Sukuk. And, but yeah, I think it's not only the Sharia scholars to blame, but it's also the lawyers themselves, because very, often they operate in tandem with the Sharia scholars. I'm not going to go as far as saying collusion or connivance, but they certainly, they have also things to answer for. And of course, some of these other cases have been dealt with already. Just finally, in terms of the aftermath of the Aofi statement, I had a long discussion with Dr. Al-Ghari. Now, I know he's not everybody's cup of tea because of his position on Tawarruk, especially in Saudi and even in Qatar. But I think he came up with some very interesting suggestions that the whole Sharia governance methodology needs to be have a new approach, a scientific approach. Sharia is a science, he said. And also, the way fatwas are compiled, articulated, needs to be revisited. There has to be a process of consultation and articulation in terms of what people are saying, much more in that respect. I mean, we all know what happened with Justice Taqi Osmani reportedly made a statement to Reuters, they misquoted him and they had to retract. And that's not the first time. Not retract, he had to give another explanation in terms of what he said or clarify. So this is happening only a few weeks ago. The governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria was misquoted by Bloomberg about issuing a sukuk. The reporter, I spoke to her because I was in Malaysia then, she was not even completely oblivious of the political sensitivities relating to Islamic finance in Nigeria. And of course she misquoted him. So here again, the Islamic financial institutions are to blame because they will speak to Bloomberg and Reuters who are only interested in that quick one-line headlines. If you look at the stories, it's very short stories. Oh, this one is going to issue a sukuk, that's the pricing for this, blah, blah, blah. So you yourself have got to improve on the quality of the way you communicate And the way you disseminate, the way you discuss issues, whether it's form over substance or form and substance and various other aspects. And just finally to conclude, Dr. Algari suggested a roadmap for the components of strong Sharia governance. In fact, he has published a paper for those who are interested. It's called Governance Standards and Protocols on the Sharia Decision-Making Process, which was delivered at the SC conference in Malaysia. And he was suggesting that Sharia decisions must always be supported by a body of evidence. Sharia declarations must always be capable of being defended by those who issue them with the same vigor with which they were issued. Sharia decisions must be feasible, taking into consideration circumstances as they are. And here I think he's defending his, what's the thing on tawarruk, you know. Empowering of the power of voting. Although the consensus may be desired, most often in Sharia laws it is a compromise that is reached. Dissent is not welcome. These are his words. Procedures for reversal of fatwas, because Sharia scholars are not infallible and they do make mistakes which have to be retracted and corrected. This process has to be done very carefully and considerably, because of the sudden reversal of a position could be a shock that may be damaging to a financial institution. In fact, I think after the office statement, one of the reasons that the UK Treasury gave in terms of delay in Sukuk was because of this uncertainty imposed. Yeah. And the ethics of this disagreement, where Sharia scholars must learn to tolerate and respect opposing views which are also valid under the Sharia. And of course, he also advocates greater consultation between Sharia scholars, and a fatwa must remain the personal, and the Sharia scholars whose signature appears on any document or fatwa must remain accountable for that fatwa. And just very last sentence, the late Dr. Badawi used to say that the one very important way of going forward is to have Sharia scholars who are also conventional lawyers and vice versa, and also Sharia scholars who are financial experts and vice versa. And hopefully that, thank you.
Thank you.